guys, my name's Dan and welcome to D&DGaming Retro Review. In for review this time around is Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. Reviewing the game with me is my brother Dav.
Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis is a point-and-click style adventure game released in 1992 and developed and published by LucasArts. LucasArts became Lucasfilm Games and was then acquired by the Walt Disney Company in 2012. Only a year or so after, in 2013, Lucasfilm began downsizing their game development side and outsourcing much of their game development, some of which passed over to Disney Interactive Studios. However, in January 2021, Lucasfilm announced a re-establishment of the Lucasfilm Games brand for future gaming titles and are currently working with numerous other game developers and publishers such as Bethesda and Ubisoft on future titles within the Indiana Jones and Star Wars franchises. When released in 1992, Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis received a number of Game of the Year awards and quickly sold over 1 million units. It is often considered amongst the greatest computer games of all time. So Dale, what are your first impressions?
I've been really looking forward to this one. I've really got into the old school point and click games in recent years, and this was one that just had critical acclaim when it was released. Even now, just gets excellent reviews, and at one point was considered one of the greatest games of all time on some lists. Bear in mind, a lot of those were probably from the 90s. I'm not sure it would be up there with today's kind of greatest games, but yeah, it certainly had critical acclaim, and I was really looking forward to it. But let's just say straight off the bat, I mean, this is an extremely dated looking game, and I really had to get in the mindset of 1992, really think back to how games were back then, how simple they were, and how essentially pixelated the graphics look on modern hardware. But once I got into that mindset, really getting into the story, then I started to enjoy it more. It's one of these games that literally opened in windowed mode, no main menu or options, anything like that. Very basic start to the game. And so, yeah, in terms of options, very limited.
Yeah, so my first impression this was a classic point-and-click adventure game from a time where games grabbed you by the balls instead of the hand. They'd say, try and beat me if you can, not come this way, look over here, like games do today. And I wasn't wrong, it's fucking hard, but actually grindingly hard at times. So in terms of your general thoughts following playthrough?
I did enjoy the game, although I did get a little impatient towards the end. It's one of these games you really have to take your time with, be prepared to go slowly to really enjoy it. I thought the story was good, and this was often brought up as having a better story than a couple of the movies, which I do actually agree with.
I found it pretty grinding to play. I mean, it's not a bad game. It's more just the age of the game, I think. It really does feel like you're playing a 30-year-old game. It hasn't aged well, and it was a stark reminder of how far games have come on, I guess. So in terms of graphics, how did you find those?
Well, as mentioned, with the options, I mean, nothing came up when I first went into the game. I had to look on Steam as to the key bindings, and eventually found menu option was like F5. But even then, it didn't really have any graphic options in there. There was some very basic options, but essentially none to speak of. I mean, again, this was 1992, so it's somewhat expected. In terms of the graphic style, I really liked the cartoony style, but it is quite hard to play on modern hardware just because it is so pixelated. And the game, I believe, was ported in 2009, so it's able to run on Steam and modern hardware easier. But when they did that, I mean, they obviously didn't upscale the resolution or anything, and so in full screen on a modern monitor, the graphics are really quite hard to look at times, and you really have to kind of use your imagination. The windowed mode does make the graphics look a bit better, obviously because it's smaller and more condensed, but for me, running in windowed mode just ruins the immersion.
Yeah, I mean, I thought, as to be expected, there were no real graphic options for this one. I think we'll skip putting our PC specs up on screen, as it's not going to make any difference with a game of this age anyway. Plus, you can see on screen what it's like. Graphics generally for the time were probably quite good, but now it's noticeable how far graphic technology has come playing a game like this in 2022. Graphics are very basic, static, pixelated environments. Also, just to mention, the game is played in its original aspect ratio. So in terms of controls, how did you find those?
But the main issue I had was it wasn't clear at all about the key bindings in the game. I had to check the Steam community pages just to get a rundown of the various key bindings. Early on in the game, I got into a fight with one of the NPCs and had no idea what I was doing. Luckily, I did actually manage to knock him out, but after that I had to just actually work out what the key bindings were. So I played on mouse and keyboard, and it was as you'd expect from a point and click game. These really haven't changed over the years in terms of their basic controls and UI. As I say, with this one, there were certain controls such as the fighting that were perhaps a little bit more in depth than a lot of point and click games. So it wasn't literally just mouse in this one. There was quite a bit of use of the keyboard as well.
Yeah, I mean, I found it was mainly the point and click mouse controls. Obviously not uncommon for a game of the early 90s. I actually didn't check out the key bindings at all. And yeah, when I came to the fight scenes, I was just sort of randomly clicking buttons and hoping something would happen. Luckily, I managed to win a couple of fights just doing that. Must have been lucky. So in terms of game story, gameplay and mechanics, the story mode of this, as expected, you play as Professor and archaeologist Dr. Indiana Jones, and on the eve of World War II, you're requested by a visitor to find a statue in the archives of Barnet College, Dr. Jones's workplace. After returning with the statue, the visitor opening it with a key and following an altercation, the visitor steals the contents of the statue, a golden-coloured metal bead. After revealing the visitor to be a Nazi agent, Indy then discovers that Sophia Hapgood, a former expedition colleague, may be the agent's next target, and so heads to New York to warn her, and so beginning the quest that ultimately reveals the secrets and the fate of the lost city of Atlantis. Much of the game's story development involved extensive research into mythology and pseudoscience revolving around the stories of Atlantis, and then were integrated into the game's story.
In terms of game mechanics, the main story of the game is driven through largely static environments whereby you point a left click with the mouse to move and interact with the environment and NPCs. It's not always obvious where interaction is possible, and sometimes it takes some searching of the areas in order to progress the story. Much of the story is progressed through dialogue with NPCs. Multiple options show on screen when in conversation with NPCs, and they respond related to your questions and answers. Choices given to the player allow numerous routes to open up, some of which lead you down paths which can't be turned back on, so it's recommended to save fairly regularly and to also create numerous save points to enable various restart points if required. There are numerous puzzles to solve along the way, although the biggest challenge in the game is asking the correct questions to progress.
So in terms of UI, what did you think?
And the UI is relatively simple, again, as you expect from this type of game, from this period, and being a point and click game. Yeah, largely just kind of typical of the UI from this era of games, really. Everything you need is on the screen, and there's basically no sub menus or anything like that.
Yes, there's a large panel that fills a big part of the screen. To the left half of the panel are actions, and to perform these, you simply click the relevant button and then click on the part of the screen that you want to apply the action to. To the right half of the UI panel is an inventory for collected items. As you hover over an action or item, blue text appears in the black panel above to highlight the action or the item. The only other time you get a slightly differing UI when you're talking to people, where you get a selection of text options that come up for you to choose your question from, and when you get into a fight with an NPC.
So in terms of sound and music, I did find the sound to be very digital, straight. As soon as you go into the game, almost sounds like a MIDI type sound effect. And all the music is done like that. I expect at the time it sounded fine, and it was cool to hear the classic theme music at the start of the game, but it was quite funny to hear it in such a kind of digital way. I thought the voice actor for Indy sounded fairly good.
Why should I, you fat tub of lard?
I did wonder at first if it might have been voiced by Harrison Ford, actually, but just as I was thinking that the credits rolled, and at the beginning of the game this is, and showed the voice actor.
Yeah, I found the voice acting very cheesy, but I guess it's to be expected. In my opinion, this sort of simply follows the Indiana Jones films in this regard. I find them quite cheesy. The sound of the voice is not great. There's a lot of fuzziness and crackles to it, which I found started to grind on me as I played.
I'm offering this mysterious eel figurine.
Now that looks interesting. You've got a deal, mister.
Again, like the graphics, it's the age of the game and the limitations of the tech, I guess, they were working with at the time. Back then, it may not have grinded on me so much, but playing all these years later, it makes it difficult to play. The music is very basic, as are the sound effects, all probably not bad for the time, but difficult to listen to by today's standards. So did you come across any bugs or glitches?
No, I didn't come across any bugs or glitches as such, although I did have this issue where you'd click on one of the numerous options to say open, close, pick up an object, and I'd click on the option that I wanted, then click on the item on the screen, and it wouldn't always register. Finding sometimes I had to double click, sometimes I clicked, and there was just a lot of clicking, and it felt quite buggy to me. I don't believe it's my mouse. I've got a relatively new mouse, and so I can't necessarily say, not everyone would have this issue, but yeah, it did almost feel like it was a bit of a glitch for me.
Yeah, so I found it ran smoothly, no bugs or glitches, but I did find exactly the same problem with the mouse clicking. It just felt like there wasn't a big enough sort of hitbox, I guess, around the text or the items on screen. So you had to be very accurate with the clicks. And if you missed a slight bit, then you had to do the whole range of clicks again in order to actually perform the action or pick up the item or whatever.
Yeah, it did become very frustrating at times, that.
So to sum up, things I liked about the game, like the varying directions a player can take in the game, although this can be somewhat annoying at times if you go down one route and you get stuck and you have to try and backtrack slightly and try a different route. It did make the game feel quite open in what is understandably, for the time it's created, quite a linear game. It's not hand-holdy at all. In fact, quite the opposite. It's very easy to get stuck, not knowing what to do for quite a while and having to really dig around and work out what to do or where to go next.
Yeah, in terms of things I liked about it, I thought it was a great story, kept me gripped all the way through, and I really found it quite immersive, which is, saying something considering what the graphics are like and how pixelated they are. That can really ruin the immersion when you're trying to play these older games, but because the story is just so good, I did really get into it. I like the fact there were lots of dialogue options. There's multiple ways you can play the game, there's multiple ways you can finish the game, and the different forks in the story as well. You can play it more solo, you can play it as a team, and yeah, there's a whole multitude of ways of actually playing the game, and that really adds to the replayability of it, which again, impressive for a 1992 game.
So in terms of things I didn't like about the game, I'll start by saying most of the things I didn't like are largely related to the age of the game, being used to more modern games and playing on more modern hardware, even though this one technically is within my generation. Clunky mouse controls, I think, were one of the most annoying things about the game. Sometimes I had to retry the same combination of pressing an action and clicking on part of the screen, like we mentioned a few minutes ago, multiple times for it to actually register what I was trying to do. And this did get really annoying, even after just a short time of playing through. The voice actors and the fuzziness that came with them got really annoying and hard to part with for long periods of playing. Although I largely like the various directions you can go as a player, depending on the questions that you ask, this could also mean that you get stuck with seemingly no way of moving forward. I had one bit where I accidentally pissed this guy off that I actually had to try and persuade to follow me, and he just then wouldn't follow me. I couldn't leave the area due to Sophia, your companion on the quest, not being with me, as the aim was to get the guy to follow me to her location. So I spent ages looking around the same little area to work out another route to go, but couldn't, and with no clues from the game at all as to where to go, I had to go back to an earlier save point and retry the section, and that time speak to the guy in a different way and try not to piss him off. And similar things happened in other parts of the game with this, and it meant a lot of back and forth and reloading of save points.
Yeah, in terms of things I didn't like, the fact there was no guide to the key bindings within the game itself, and I had to look elsewhere, was frustrating. I know a lot of games of this time actually had a separate printed manual, and that would often have the key bindings in it, and so I'm not going to knock it off the score too much for this, because again, they're a product of their time, and you won't always find all that you need in the game itself, and you had to refer to a separate manual. As we already mentioned about the UI, it'd be frustrating with talked about that, and Dav mentioned it as well. And I will emphasize the fact that for whatever reason, it didn't seem to register a lot of the time, and it did cause me issues throughout the game. There's one particular section where you do a balloon ride. I don't think I'm really adding any spoilers here, but basically one of the most frustrating things I've ever done in a game, because there was no guidance whatsoever, and I had to again look elsewhere as to what the hell I needed to do, and it was just frustrating controls, to say the least. We will be honest and say we both used a guide on sections of this game, and I do honestly wonder if it'd be possible to complete it without a guide. I mean, some of the puzzles are extremely hard, and there's points where you can easily die just by making the wrong dialogue choice. And I really do feel that you need the guide to hand to certainly enjoy and get the most from this game.
So in terms of missed opportunities, do you think there are any in this?
Well, I feel like there could have been more guidance with hints and tips throughout the game, perhaps like pop-ups to help here and there. Again, I guess that wasn't standard in the early 90s, but perhaps when they ported this over to modern hardware, they could have, updated it a bit with that sort of stuff. And again, while they were doing that, it would have been nice for them to do a bit of a graphical update, even if it's just, the resolution, just to make it more compatible with modern hardware. So in terms of scores, what do you give this one, Dav?
This game was quite critically acclaimed for its time, and it's not hard to see why. The film-like story, multiple gameplay directions make for an interesting, quite gripping game, and I did put myself back in 1992 when playing this in order to give it a fair review. But for me, with the numerous overly challenging game parts and lack of direction from the game in those parts, frustratingly clunky controls and very dated game graphics and sound, I found it too frustratingly grindy and clunky to play in today's age. Back in 1992, I think I would have got on with it better and enjoyed it much more. I feel that now it's best remembered as a gaming classic of the past that informed the future of gaming, and was up there with the best in its era, but now best serves as a reminder of how far we've come with gaming technology. So for me, it's a respectable 7 out of 10.
For me, this was a fun game with a great story, but I did struggle with the limitations of a game from 1992 and how that plays on modern hardware. Yeah, especially towards the end, I just struggled to keep engaged with it. I mean, that being said, it's still going to be a solid 7 out of 10 from me. Well guys, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and comment. Hit that bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video, and we'll see you in the next one.
Why should I, you fat tub of lard?